Hello, my name is P.T. Hylton. I'm here today to talk about Brandon Sanderson's book, The Final Empire. It's the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. I was kind of on a quest this month to read a few books that are very popular on BookTube that I've seen quite a few booktubers talk about. The first one of those that I read was The Final Empire. I'd never read any Brandon Sanderson, and he is obviously a very popular fantasy author, and among booktubers, he's got a very good reputation. So I thought I would check him out, and this seemed like a good place to start. So the Final Empire is the story of this world where there's a dark lord, an evil guy who's basically been the ruler of this land for 1,000 years. 1,000 years ago, he got some crazy powers, came to power, and he's been ruling ever since. And some people supported him 1,000 years ago. Some people tried to fight against him, and now it's 1,000 years later, and he's rewarded the descendants of the people who supported him way back when with super awesome magical powers, and he has punished those who didn't, the descendants of those who didn't support him, by basically making them slaves. And for many generations, this has been going on. The magical system in this book is super interesting, and the first time I heard it described by a YouTuber, I was like, that's kind of gross and does not sound like a very interesting magical system at all. But when I read it, it actually plays out very cool. The idea is that people with magical powers ingest little tiny bits of metal, and depending on the type of metal, they can like burn that metal in their stomach to create these different powers. Most people don't have any powers, but most of those who do are able to only burn one metal, and therefore only have one sort of power. The most rare type of person is the Mistborn of the title, who is able to burn all the different types of metals and therefore use all sorts of different powers. Now, from what I'm describing it, and you might be like I was when I heard it, and I was like, that sounds weird, but it is very cool. And in fact, I really got into the magic system as I was reading the story, and it's used in lots of really interesting ways. For instance, there's one metal that you burn that allows you to push metal objects away from you or pull them towards you, kind of almost like a magneto kind of magnetism power. But it's used to great effect because some of the characters who have this power will just carry around like a metal coin, and they'll just drop it on the ground and push it away from themselves, which will send them flying up into the air into like the top of a building or something, and then they can attract the metal and bring it back into their hand, and kind of was a really interesting way of transporting yourself around, in my opinion. And I actually really got into it. It was like when I was a kid and I watched Star Wars, and I would like see an object across the room for the next couple weeks after the first time I watched it, and be like, gosh, if only I had the Force, I could just shoot that over to myself. I kind of felt the same way with this, where whenever I saw like a high building, the next couple weeks after I read this book, I'd be like, ooh, if I was a Mistborn, I could just shoot myself right to the top of that building using only a coin. So I actually did get into that. The story is about one of the slave people who has some Mistborn powers, and their struggle against the Dark Lord. Really, that's the main thing you need to know about it. The main character is a girl named Vin, who is a thief. She was raised, most of her time growing up was spent in like a group of thieves, and kind of one of her defining characteristics is that she doesn't trust anyone. Her brother, who she grew up with, was very abusive to her and really drove into her head that everyone will betray you, don't trust anyone. I will say in the world of Mistborn, it does not seem like there's much of a middle class. It seems like most people tend to be either the rich nobles or the oppressed slaves, which was kind of interesting. And I like the story. I like the characters a lot. It was the first really epic fantasy book I've read in probably about a year or so, and I really had a great time with it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars out of 5. The one problem I did have with the book a little bit was the love story. Like I said, the main character, Vin, kind of her defining characteristic is that she doesn't trust anyone, and then there's this part where she bumps into this guy that she just has no reason to trust, and instantly she just feels like she can trust him, and she, even when no one else is trusting him, even the people who in the story so far have been very trusting, or more trusting at least than her, they don't trust this guy, but she just feels it in her heart and she trusts him, and that's how the love story works, which I understand. The point of that was, the idea that love can overcome our internal barriers, I guess, but some of it just didn't quite feel true to the character to me. I wish they would have played that slightly differently, and maybe had her be a little more untrusting of him, and slowly over time come to trust him, and kind of let her guard down in that regard. But overall, it was a good book. Love the world, love the magical system. The characters were pretty good. The book does resolve in a fairly definitive way that didn't make me want to rush out and get the next one, because I was like, well, they've kind of finished that story. I will eventually get the next one because I like the world and I like the magic system and I like the characters and I want to see what happens to them next. But I'm not in a huge rush to do so. So that's my first Brandon Sanderson. I see what the fuss is about. I was really impressed also with the way that it's a really complex world, and he very quickly introduces you to it in a way that isn't disorienting, and he explains it to you in a very clear way. So he's a good writer and obviously great world builder, great magic system guy. I will check out some more of his stuff in the future. That's going to do it for this time. I'll be back next week with another booktube favorite, which is The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. So I'll talk to you next time.